Fragile X syndrome is a genetic disorder causing intellectual disability as well as a variety of physical findings. As the most common cause of intellectual disability in boys, Fragile X is important for medical practitioners to be familiar with. In this video, I'll give you a visual mnemonic so you can keep all the facts about this disorder straight inside your head. Nothing beats the country air. Today we find ourselves on top of a windmill. Yeah, we're on a windmill. And have you ever noticed how the blades of a windmill form a giant X? The X formed by the windmill here should anchor you to this scene on Fragile X syndrome. If the X formed by our windmill is not enough, check out how the blades are broken in several places, with missing pieces. In other words, this isn't any X, it's a fragile X. Next, you can tell that this X-shaped windmill is pretty big by the shadow it's casting. Yeah, this windmill is definitely the dominant structure on my farm. This is here to help you remember that Fragile X syndrome is inherited in an X-linked dominant pattern. Get it? A big dominant X for X-linked dominant. Let's move on. So why are we here anyways? To fix the windmill, of course. After years of negligence, we finally decided to take a closer look at the cogs running this old thing. Wait, cogs? Doesn't the word cog kind of remind you of CGG? Yeah, I'm talking about DNA here. Cog for CGG, get it? And there are 3 cogs operating this windmill, which should help us remember that Fragile X is caused by trinucleotide CGG repeat. Fragile X is one of only a few trinucleotide repeat disorders, so this CGG repeat is actually high yield to remember. So we know that these CGG trinucleotide repeats happen on the X chromosome. But what specific gene is affected? Well, take a look at myself here. Yeah, I'm a farmer. What were you expecting anyways? This should help you remember FMR1, the gene affected in Fragile X syndrome. Get it? A farmer for FMR1? In summary, Fragile X syndrome is caused by CGG trinucleotide repeats on the FMR1 gene, which is located on the X chromosome. I just love it when all the pieces come together like this. Kinda like cogs in a windmill. Next, notice the material that our windmill blades and cogs are made of. Yeah, they're made of this metal. What else could cogs be made of? Since metal is our recurring symbol for methyl, all this metal should help you remember hypermethylation, the epigenetic process seen in Fragile X. You see, a CGG trinucleotide repeat exerts its effects by inducing hypermethylation of FMR1. And if you recall from genetics class, hypermethylation typically decreases expression of genes. So if you get a question about the exact mechanism behind how FMR1 is affected, just picture all this metal to remember that it undergoes hypermethylation. Back in the day, when the region containing the FMR1 gene was viewed under the microscope, the chromosome appeared constricted. This constricted region was said to be fragile, which gave rise to the name Fragile X syndrome. This constriction is thought to be due to the hypermethylation of FMR1. Just thought I'd toss that in. Now let's swivel back to look at me. Yeah, I'm a guy, which should help you remember that Fragile X typically affects more boys than girls. Wait, what? I thought that you said that Fragile X was an X-linked dominant inherited disease. I may not be a genetics expert, but shouldn't prevalence be similar between boys and girls here? Well, let me explain what's actually going on here. By mutation burden alone, you'd probably be correct. But you see, Fragile X is more severe in males than in females. The rationale here is that females have 2 X chromosomes, so it is thought that a damaged FMR1 gene can be compensated for by another FMR1 gene on the other X chromosome. Unlike females, males only have 1 X chromosome, so a damaged FMR1 gene is the only copy they've got. Functionally, females have much milder symptoms, even to the point of not being diagnosed. This explains why prevalence appears to be higher in boys. I also want to mention that exam writers will almost always give you a boy in question stems. There's other reasons for this, which I'll touch on below. Alright, back to the story. You know how windmills are always placed beside streams? Well, take a look at the most important inhabitant of this stream, a turtle. Yeah, as you already know, turtles are a recurring symbol for developmental delay. Because what's more delay than a turtle? Specifically, intellectual disability in Fragile X syndrome is important to remember, as Fragile X is the most common form of inherited intellectual disability in boys. When also considering girls, it is second only to Down syndrome. While we're here, I also want to mention that Fragile X is highly associated with autism spectrum disorder, and patients affected may also have additional delays in language and social development. Got that? Let's return to the side of our windmill and look at my trusted companion. Yeah, it's a donkey. Why the long face, buddy? By the way, my donkey's long face here is just a mnemonic to help you remember the long faces seen in Fragile X syndrome. Question stems will often give you a picture of a patient with long faces, such as the one here. But my friend here is actually a loaded symbol, and I want you to notice his large ears. These long ears are a symbol for the large everted ears seen in patients with Fragile X syndrome. Both long faces and large everted ears may be provided through a picture, so you should recognize these findings for test day. Afterwards, let's take a look at what our long-faced friend is carrying. Yeah, he's got these long sacs slung over his sides. Your perspective kind of makes these sacs look testicular though. Yep, these sacs are here to help you remember macroorchidism, or the finding of enlarged testicles in boys affected with Fragile X syndrome. Remember how I said earlier that exam writers would almost always give you a boy? Well, this is why. They can give you the finding of macroorchidism to make you think about Fragile X syndrome. In short, if you see a boy with intellectual disability, long faces, and macroorchidism, you should definitely be thinking about Fragile X. Finally, let's talk about the hat I'm sporting. Yeah, I used to work in the church, but I've since retired for a quiet life on the farm. I could never really give up the mitre hat though. I guess I've just gotten so used to it. The mitre hat I'm wearing now should help you remember the finding of mitral valve prolapse. After all, the mitral valve was literally named for the two cusps found on mitre hats. Mitral valve prolapse refers to a floppy mitral valve, and it is the single most important cardiac implication of Fragile X syndrome. If you ever remember to bring along a stethoscope, just know that you should be listening for a mid-systolic click with a late systolic murmur, the auditory result of a mitral valve flopping loose followed by the regurgitation of blood. Something kind of like this. If mitral valve prolapse is left unmanaged, it can lead to heart failure. The connection to the heart and auscultation makes this a wonderful way to test both genetics and cardiology. Just remember my mitre hat, and you'll remember mitral valve prolapse for test day. What a journey. Let's recap. Fragile X syndrome is an X-linked dominant disorder caused by a CGG trinucleotide repeat. This trinucleotide repeat occurs on the FMR1 gene, resulting in hypermethylation of the gene. While both sexes are affected, the disease is both more common and more severe in boys. Clinical findings include developmental delay, long faces, large everted ears, macroorchidism, and potentially mitral valve prolapse. Phew, that's it for Fragile X. Now I've got to get back to my crops. I'll see you at the next year's harvest.